Thank you. Today I want to talk a little bit about cover crops and what they mean and how they affect farmers as well as wildlife and other situations. So to talk a little bit about what cover crops do, cover crops are used to cover the ground and maintain the ground throughout the season beyond that of a cash crop. The reason we do this is to improve soil health, and soil health comes back to the chemical, biological, and physical properties of the soil that we're trying to maintain. So a cover initially allows us to control the soil from start to finish year over year over year. So what we're trying to maintain here is the biology of the soil as well as the physical characteristics. We're not wanting to have runoff, we're not wanting to have soil loss, and we're wanting to provide potentially a habitat for new species of animals or our current animals here in the communities and in the areas. So one thing we've done in order to incorporate that is learned that certain cover crops are beneficial for farmers, but not only farmers, for wildlife. So a cereal rye or a millet, or as well as legumes and other cover crops, are something we can use in order to build and diversify our farms and provide another source of income, and that income can be from wildlife habitat and hunting. Hunting is a viable resource here in Arkansas, and we've been developing it and doing more and more with it over the years. So one thing we've learned is that timing is everything, and weather plays a role in that timing, but cover crop timing usually is dependent on cash crops. So our cash crops come in the season, usually in April, May time frame. They're planted, and they come out of the field between August and November on a typical year. Most cover crops in our area should be planted potentially in November at the latest, but preferably in September and October, because they provide not only habitat, but they provide the soil health benefits. So these issues that we run into, though, is weather permits us from getting into the field and harvesting in a timely manner. So we end up pushing those time frames off later and later in the year, which puts us behind our hunting time frames in Arkansas and behind the ability of the cover crop to come up before we get cold winter spells. When we talk about cover crops, though, we often talk about the benefits and how it's always a win-win-win, but there are also disadvantages too in these cover crops, and to touch on some of those is insect attractment. You may have wildlife or other animals that you may not want in your fields. They're going to cause long-term issues when you get back into your cash crop. Some of those animals might be wild hogs. Wild hogs are a detriment to most cash crops and in cover crop scenarios. So if you're providing a habitat where you have a lot of wild hogs, you could potentially grow that habitat, which will push out your wildlife you want, such as deer, ducks, and other native animals. So one thing that we've worked towards is trying to find that neutral zone by trying to pick out and look at cover crops that are beneficial overall for the group, that's for the farmer, for the producers, ones hunting the ground, everything in that nature. To look at some of these, as behind me here, Japanese millet is a good option for wildlife, especially waterfowl. Waterfowl tend to enjoy it. It's a good food source, provides good cover when they're land in it, does well in a wet environment such as this where you're trying to build a waterfowl habitat. If you're looking for more of a deer situation, you might look to more a cereal rye or a black oat or a legume such as a winter pea that provide nutrient content for the animals and a bedding material from the bed in, lay down in on hot days when it's before we get into the cold of winter when they're in rut. Some other options would be triticale, as well as some ones we don't use, canola. We throw that out. We don't use canola. We try not to use annual rise. Annual rise are detrimental because they're hard to kill in a situation where you let them run amok. So take those out of your mind. So the top three I'd recommend is a millet in a waterfowl scenario, as well as a cereal rye or some kind of legume like a winter pea in a situation where you're going to be using them predominantly for deer and waterfowl habitat. Now, to move on beyond talking about the types and the timing and all that, some issues you may run into is cost. Costs are something that are finite to each field. You may not assume the cost on your cash crop year. You might not even think about what your cash crop's going to bring fall in the cover crop. You may be putting this cover crop in specifically for wildlife. So you have to think about those things. So I won't get into a lot of detail on cost because I don't want the cost to become what you're thinking. This is more than a one-year project. You'll need to invest several years into these projects to make it beneficial for you and your farm and your wildlife habitat. So what you would need to do is start looking at, well, year one, I want to do something simple. So a cereal rye, or maybe just a legume cover crop, or just a millet if you're looking at waterfowl, would be the best choice for you. Then you can move on and diversify. And once you get to that point of diversification, you can better understand where your return on investment is, because that year one, and with everything we've worked with and I've dealt with over time as a county agent, we've not seen that initial benefit. We may have seen increased habitat, may have seen increased movement of animals across the property, but we may not be able to put that into words or a dollar figure that makes sense. So spend the time and investment that year one learning, and then build it over several years, and that'll be more beneficial for you and your property and what you tend to do. So to learn more about cover crops, wildlife, or any of your agricultural needs, just contact your local county extension agent, and that information can be found on our website.